Believe in Astros podcast, your home for all things Astros. With your hosts, sports writer Jeff Balke and Astros broadcaster and former third baseman Jeff Blum. Now, here's Balke and Blummer.
What's up, H-Town? Welcome to episode 15 of the Believe in Astros podcast on the Believe Podcasting Network. I'm Jeff Balke. My partner, Jeff Blum, is not joining us today. First of all, it is currently about 12:45 on Wednesday, so he's in the middle of a broadcast. But secondarily, we were not able to record on Thursday, which we would normally do in case of a day game, because he's going to be out of town. So he and I will resume with a special Flash episode that will be coming up over the weekend. We're going to start doing a couple episodes a week as opposed to just one, with one shorter and then one full-length one. So you got me flying solo today. You can find us on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, and other places where you get your podcasts. And, of course, you can see us on YouTube, including just me by myself. Just me, my bobbleheads, my guitars, my Astrodome chairs, and just me. That's it. I would say my dogs, but they're not in here. Of course, you can find us on Twitter, at Jeff Balke, JEFFBALKE, and at Blummer27 to find Jeff Blum. You can also find our Believe in Astros Twitter, at BLEAV in Astros. And please do send us questions. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to start doing a bit of a mailbag segment where Jeff Blum gets to answer all of your crazy questions. And maybe I can pitch in there as well. Who knows? So today we do have one special guest that'll be coming on a little bit later. Dr. Matusow, who is a legend at Rice University, a longtime professor, was teacher there for 50 years, is still a member of the Baker Institute there. Also happens to be my father-in-law, and the reason we're going to have him on is because he is an absolute lifelong baseball fan. He's from Philadelphia. He's in his 80s now, and the guy he remembers everything about baseball. He's a massive Astros fan, and I've been wanting to have him on since we started the podcast. We just haven't been able to get a chance to do it, but today got an interview with him that you'll get to see a little bit later in the broadcast. So that's what we got going so far. I want to dig in first on these Major League Baseball rule changes for 2023. If you haven't seen it, Major League Baseball passed a number of rule changes that are coming next season. Now, these rule changes are somewhat controversial among players. In fact, I think it was 4 or 5 different players who sat on the rules committee all rejected them. And there's probably some good reasoning why, but I just want to go through them. I wrote about them in the Houston Press. You can find my author page on our Linktree site where you can see the links to all of those. The first one, and I kind of did this story on how they would impact the Astros, and so I want to get into that just a little bit. The first one is pitchers are only allowed 2 pickoff moves or step-offs per bat. I should have also mentioned in the story that batters are only allowed 1 stepping out of the box per at-bat. Now, overall, this I don't think is going to make that much difference. The Astros don't have a lot of guys that are real slow in terms of their delivery. They don't have a lot of guys who are super deliberate and throwing over to first or any of that kind of stuff. So I'm not sure this is going to make a big deal. I think that obviously this is part of baseball's desire to sort of tighten up the game, to make it faster. Games are still about a little over 3 hours per game. In the minor leagues, some of these changes have cut that down by half an hour. And I think Major League Baseball is looking for that magic sweet spot of about 2.5 hours, which frankly even works in the NFL, works in the NBA. And that's what they're trying to do. And this is one of those things. I don't think it'll have a dramatic impact on the Astros. Second thing is they're going to increase the size of the bases, and I've also read that they're going to lower the profile of them a little bit. The idea here is to decrease injuries. In fact, Major League Baseball reported that just changing the base from 15 to 18 inches, and this is just first, second, and third, not home plate, that it has reduced player injuries in the minors by 13.5%. That's a big deal. We just saw Chaz McCormick dislocate his pinky finger just recently on a bag. Now, I'm not sure that would have been solved by this, as Chaz kind of fell back into first. But a lot of the idea of this is to, one, protect players from injury, and two, maybe give them, it shortens the distance by 6 inches. If you're talking 3 inches per bag, that's a 6-inch change. And with guys that are this fast, that could be a benefit. That could be something that encourages more steals, encourages more movement on the base paths. Another nod to adding offense to the game, which is, I think, the other thing baseball wants to do, is wants to encourage more offense, which brings us to rule number 3, and that is the shift. The shift has been controversial in baseball for some time. The Astros are one of the teams that use the shift more than, not more than any team, but they certainly employ it a lot. At this point, baseball is saying you got to keep 2 guys on either side of second base. So basically the days of putting 4 guys on one side with 1 in the outfield against a pull hitter, those days are over. Now, it might benefit some guys on the team too. Yordan Alvarez, who's certainly more of a pull hitter. Alex Bregman, more of a pull hitter. Kyle Tucker. These guys might have more holes in the side of the infield that benefits them, and it might lead to more offense for them. We don't really know. It is worth noting that the change in the shift did not make, according to some reports from Baseball America, it had virtually no impact on offense in the minor leagues. That essentially it has really done little to nothing to change what hitters have done. So we'll have to see if that makes a difference. The last thing, of course, is the pitch clock, which has been much talked about. The Major League Baseball is going to allow 15 seconds in between pitches when there's no one on base, 20 seconds when there is a runner in the base paths. Any violation by the pitcher or catcher will relate in a ball. A violation by the batter results in a strike. Again, this is about tightening up these games and trying to reduce how long they take. And this is particularly true, I think, in the playoffs. Like, I think you can argue that regular season, there's so many games that, honestly, do fans watch all of them? Probably not. Do fans watch all of every game? For the most part, not. So, and I don't know that this will necessarily dramatically change that, but I do think it will have an impact on the playoffs. I mean, you saw we had some games that were 4 hours long plus in playoff games with all of these mound visits and all of these various different things that just take forever, right? So we're going to see less of that. And I think, honestly, that's probably a good thing. I think that's probably a real benefit to fans overall who don't want to have to sit through that. I was at a game this past week. Thanks very much to my buddy Frank Bullington, who hooked my wife and I up with tickets. We all went and had a good time, even though the Astros lost to the Angels in that one game. I picked up this lovely little retro hat in the team shop while I was there. By the way, Frank Bullington, some of you might know, if you ever listen to 1560 The Game, know him as Frankie the Bull, who was the creative guy there. There's a new site that I helped him put together, a little plug for it, called 1560archive.com. It's literally the archive of, Frank is a good friend and a guy who is one of the most incredibly intelligent hoarders I've ever met. Like, he knows, it's not like a hoarder where he piles stuff up in his living room and, is surrounded by old newspapers. He saves things, though, and he keeps them organized. And he has this massive trove of video and audio from 1560, and it's just absolutely spectacular. So get a chance, take a visit, 1560archive.com, and take a look around. You get to see Lance Zierlein talking like an Italian guy, which is one of the funniest things you'll ever see. And, of course, SEC guy and all the other characters for those of you who are familiar. Anyway, I was at the game, and my wife was there. And my wife is not a baseball fan directly. She does like going to games, and she will, she's, because her father, Alan, who we're going to have on in a little bit, watched the games when she was a kid. She does kind of find them comforting to have them on, which is great for me because I can watch games. But, she talked about, like, how long is it going to be? Are we going to stay for the whole thing? Because it is a long deal. I mean, it's, if you drive to the ballpark and then stay for the whole game and then drive home from the ballpark, or in our case, Uber with someone who clearly did not know where they were going, you're talking about a 4, 5, 6 hour sort of, thing. It's fun. Don't get me wrong. It's fun. Even when they lose, it's fun. But that's a long time, and that's a huge commitment. It's a particularly huge commitment for families with kids. So I can understand them wanting to cut back on time. It makes sense, and these are the rules they think are going to accomplish that. We'll see what impact they have. They do not start until next season, 2023, so we'll keep an eye on that. So let's move on and talk about some things that I've discussed. I've got it in my weekly Astros roundup on the Houston Press. The first thing is, let's talk a little bit about the returns of a couple of players. Aledmus Diaz was back yesterday, was in the lineup, DHing. He went 2 for 4. Diaz is critical for the Astros because not only does he give them a good bat in the lineup, which he does. I mean, he's been great all season. But more importantly than that, he gives them flexibility in the outfield. Diaz can play some center field. He can play some left field. He can play all the spots on the infield. It gives them a way to give guys breaks, but it also gives them a way to get their best lineup on the field. If you decided, let's say we're going to DH Yordan Alvarez and put Diaz in center field, then put Trey Mancini in left. Now all of a sudden you have really your best hitters that are going to be in the lineup. Now I don't know if they'll do that. Diaz isn't traditionally center fielder. He can play it. But I do think it's an important get for them to have back from injury. He missed 23 games with that groin injury. He apparently is doing quite well, and he's back. Additionally, Justin Verlander will be back on Friday from his what did they call it? It was a calf injury. It was some kind of bizarre. Blummer and I talked about it on here and talked about feverishly searching Google for what it was. Fortunately, he's doing great. He's going to be back on Friday. They're going to have to start thinking about what they're going to do with the rotation because Hunter Brown continues to impress. Last night, 6 innings, 2 earned runs, I think 6 strikeouts, 82 pitches, stretched him a little beyond his last outing, which was a shutout. He got to pitch for the first time at Comiskey Park in Detroit, where he grew up idolizing Justin Verlander, of all things. I mean, it must have been a dream come true for the kid, but, I mean, he was really good. I mean, really good and very impressive. And so I think it's worth noting that this crowds the pitching situation even more so. Verlander's back. Now you have Hunter Brown in the lineup. And then you look and you have all your other guys. You have Lance McCullers, who's really starting to look good again. And you've got Framber Valdez, who just tied the major league record with 24 consecutive quality starts, tied DeGrom. And then you have Christian Javier, who had a bit of a rough outing the last time, but still very good. Jose Urquidy, another bit of a rough outing, but still very good. And then Luis Garcia, who is probably going to be the odd man out when it comes to the playoffs. It really is an embarrassment of riches for these guys. But I think the more important thing, forget about that for the moment. Let's talk a little bit about the offense, because the offense has struggled recently. There is no question that the offense has struggled. But suddenly we are starting to see the signs that things are coming around. Look at what Blum said a couple of weeks ago, talking about how he just could feel that Yordan was coming back. He saw him doing some warm-up hitting. He saw him making contact. The hands are starting to feel better. And now you're seeing it. 2 home runs in 3 games for Yordan. He's crushing the ball when he hits it. I think the 1 home run was 110 off the bat. That's 110 miles an hour off the bat is unbelievable. And then like we said, you've got Diaz back. Altuve's been good all year. Bregman has still continued to do well. Jeremy Pena had 3 hits the other night, and he's starting to look a little bit better. Had a home run. But here's the guy that I think is most interesting out of all this. Yuli Gurriel. Yuli has struggled all season long. But, like, let's look at his slash line. He's slashing 249, 292, 363, and then 655 OPS. Look at his slash numbers just in the games prior to last night, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, the box score from last night, he did. Let's take a look. His slash line before last night was this. Pull it up here. It was 429, 429, 500, and 929 in those 3 games prior to that, right? That was unreal, right? Already. But that's only a 3-game sample, right? So last night, he comes in and he goes, Yuli Gurriel, 2 for 4 last night with a pair of RBIs and his first home run since July 1st. Now they're playing today. I haven't seen anything yet about what's going on, but Yuli Gurriel, if he turns a corner and suddenly they're getting quality at bats from Yuli Gurriel and Jeremy Pena, this is going to be a gauntlet to face for anybody. So let's all keep our fingers crossed that that's exactly what's happening. This is a comeback for Yuli Gurriel, because that would be spectacular for everyone who loves the Astros. All right. Last couple things we'll do before I get to our special guest. First of all, the playoffs are looming, right? We're a month away from the start of the postseason. The Astros are now, I think their magic number to clinch playoff seeds is like 4. Their magic number for the AL West is like 8, and I think their magic number for the first place in the AL is like 11, something like that. Brian McTaggart, who I've said many, many times before, is an absolute must-read. He had his Astros Beat column that just came out today. It comes out every Wednesday. And he talked about the playoff picture. And he went through the possibilities of which teams the Astros would face after the wild card round. And basically he breaks it down to the Mariners, the Blue Jays, the Guardians, and the Rays. Those are their 4. Now, out of those 4, who would you guys rather than me? Personally, if I'm picking one, I'm picking the Mariners. Mariners, look, it would be their first time in the playoffs in 20 years. As he mentions, that T-Mobile Park would be out of control. But, and of course, the Astros haven't had to face Luis Castillo. But when you consider the other options, the Blue Jays are not great. But you'd be facing George Springer, Teoscar Hernandez, who seems to always go ruin the Astros, and then Cavan Biggio. Is it Cavan or Cavan? Or Cavan? I don't know what it is. Craig Biggio's son. That just feels like, I don't know, it feels too emotional. Then you have the Guardians, who the Astros have not played very well against. And then you have the Rays. Now, the Rays, the Astros haven't played them at all. They're about to play them 6 games in 12 days coming up here in the next couple of weeks. But the Rays are really, really good at pitching. Now, they're not very good at hitting. And as McTaggart points out, Tyler Glasnow will not be back. So the Astros have an advantage there. But if I'm ranking these, like, the team I want first is the Mariners. I think the team I want second is probably the Rays, just simply because they just don't hit well and the Astros pitch incredibly well. Then I would go Guardians, and then I'd probably go Blue Jays last. I don't think I want Springer hitting. Does anybody want George Springer hitting a game-winning home run off the Astros? It feels gross even talking about it. It kind of makes me physically ill to even think about that as a possibility. George Springer comes up, bottom of the 9th and hits a home run. God, it's horrible. It's a horrible thought and a horrible feeling, and I don't want to think about it anymore. Okay, so now I want to bring on my guest, and so let's do that. as I mentioned before, a very special guest today, Alan Matusow, the man, the myth, the legend, Rice University legend, uh, my father-in-law, and a hell of a nice guy, and a huge, longtime baseball fan. Alan, welcome on.
Well, thanks, Jeff. Glad to be here.
So I want to give people just a sense of how much baseball you have experienced in your life. You are from Philadelphia originally. So what was the team that you rooted for growing up?
I loved the A's. I was a Philadelphia A's fan, and I followed them in Philadelphia, Kansas City, Oakland, and Las Vegas.
So that should tell everybody just exactly how long you've been following it. Who was your favorite player growing up?
Well, I had various of them, but I guess my favorite of all time was Bobby Shantz, who pitched for the A's. He's a little guy. Do you ever hear of him? I mean, he was big in his time, and I think it was either 52 or 54 when he went 24-7 and was the most valuable player actually in the American League. Wow. And he weighed in at 130 pounds at the beginning of a game and 120 pounds at the end. But he was a heck of a pitcher. And that year that he won 24 games, I was such a fan that I went out to see him 7 times. And he lost.
Wow.
I'm sorry. He lost 7. I went out to see him 4 times, and he lost all 4.
Well, I guess that means you should never rely on yourself as a good luck charm.
No,
for anybody.
No.
So how do you feel about the A's now that the Astros play them? Because you're a huge Astros fan.
Yeah,
so
I'm a huge Astros fan. Yeah. But I got to tell you, when you deal with me, you're not dealing with an expert. You're not dealing with Jeff Blum, who's great, or even if you're my nephew, I got to say you're not bad. You're dealing with Joe Fan. I mean, I'm just in the game. I've loved the game for decades. I once tried to do the math, and I figured that I have seen 2 million pitches, and I find every single one of them fascinating. So,
well, I like to tell people that you are the world's most pessimistic Astros fan, and I feel like that is probably accurate. At every game, I've never seen this man at a game where he didn't think the Astros were probably going to lose. And I assume that is a defense mechanism on your part to keep from being overly disappointed, right?
Yeah, I think it comes from the fact that I saw Bobby Shantz lose all 4 games that I went to see in 1952. But yeah, I don't want to jinx them. I don't want to, move the universe into a hostile position. So I take a pessimistic view. I think that helps the team.
So how do you feel about talking about no hitters in the middle of a game? Is that completely verboten?
No, I will do that.
You'll do that.
I get so excited I can't control myself.
So talking about this Astros team, I know we've talked about it quite a bit, you and I, about what we think is good, what we think is bad, where we think their weak links are. Obviously, both of us have been worried about their offense, but it kind of looks like they're playing better.
It does. I mean, you look at the end of their lineup, it's pretty weak, but you've got Diaz back, and I'm a big Diaz fan. Jordan,
I know you are.
He's going to hit again, and the pitching is fantastic. So I don't like to say this, but I'm fairly optimistic.
That's terrifying, really.
Yeah,
I'm not sure
really.
if maybe I might need to strike that from the podcast.
Right. Don't quote me.
So I was reading, I don't know if you read it, but Brian McTaggart, who writes from MLB.com, it has a great Astros column every Wednesday, newsletter.
And the one he had this week, I'm really curious to get your take on it. He had the 4 teams the Astros are most likely to meet in the ALDS. Of course, the Astros are pretty much almost a guarantee that they're not going to have to play in a wild card game. Obviously, you've reminded me many times that you've witnessed the Red Sox that was up, and
No,
then
the Phillies. The Phillies
right?
had a 6-game lead with 12 to go and finished 2 games out in 1964. And now there's another reason why I'm a pessimist.
Well, fair enough. But if they are going to the ALDS and they are going to face one of these teams, the 4 possible teams are the Mariners, the Blue Jays, the Guardians, and the Rays. So my question to you is, who would you most want to face out of that group, and who would you least want to face out of that group?
I'd like to face the Guardians, but I do not want to face Tampa Bay. I fear Tampa Bay.
Yeah, I understand that. I will say, at least with Tampa Bay, they can't hit. They're really good. They're great pitching, but they're not a very good offensive team. The one that scares me the most is the Blue Jays, just simply because, because of George Springer. Like I was saying in the podcast earlier, like, nothing would destroy my soul more than watching one of the most beloved Astros and one of my all-time favorite Astros hit like a game-winning home run against this former team. I might be done. That might be it for me. So, and then of course you've got Craig Biggio's kid plays for them, and Teoscar Hernandez, who seems to bat around the Astros all the time.
Yeah.
So that's why emotionally I worry probably more about them than anybody else.
I can see that, especially with Springer's the kind of player who could actually rise to the occasion and kill us.
Yeah. Oh no, he could, and and also, who wants to watch that? I mean, I don't want to see that guy against us in the playoffs. It's just, I mean, he's Mr. Playoffs. Has been for the Astros for years. So now with the Astros getting close to the postseason, though, and with Justin Verlander now coming back Friday, I see he's scheduled to pitch against your former favorite team, the A's. On Friday. You and I had talked about this a lot. Who are they going to pitch in the postseason? I think it's pretty clear that Luis Garcia is probably not going to make the postseason, which is crazy considering how good he's been.
Yeah.
But what do you make of Hunter Brown? This kid is just lights out.
One more start, and he makes the postseason roster. Not as a starter, but
as a bullpen. I mean, 6 innings again last night, 2 runs. I mean, the slider is 94-mile-an-hour slider.
Unbelievable. And of course, the batters don't know him. So
that's an advantage I hadn't thought about, but it really is. They don't know him, so they haven't swung against him. When you were growing up or when you were an adult, I'm not sure. I know you've seen all the Astros postseason appearances, but what to you was besides the World Series, because that's the easy one, what was the one that you recall as being sort of the most memorable that you were sort of just locked in on because it was whether it was your team you're rooting for or not?
Well, when I grew up, baseball was really the national pastime. I mean, there were polls that showed that we were way ahead of pro football. Pro football never took off until about 1958 when they had famous playoff game with Johnny Unitas and I can't remember the other guy, but it was a famous game. But until then, baseball was the All-Star game was a national event. Everybody, when you grew up, when I grew up, the 2 things that you had to know. You had to be able to tell a 48 Chevy from a 47 Chevy, and you had to know the batting averages. So we were in everything. And the game I most remember was as a playoff game was, I think, maybe the most famous playoff game of all time, and that was 1951. I was then, I was about 14, and I ran home from school to see this. I don't know that any kid is running home from school to watch a playoff game that his team is not in today. But that's what you did.
Right.
So I was there watching in my black and white TV when Bobby Thompson hit the shot heard round the world against Ralph Branca, and the Giants beat the Dodgers in the last of a 3-game playoff, and that was really a riveting baseball moment.
I bet it was.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. I mean, there's. I think you talk about the national pastime like that. I mean, now you don't really. I mean, there's so many different entertainment options that are available.
Right.
Sports are just one of the many.
Yeah.
That and of course now you don't. You know, back then too, TV was only a few channels, if that,
Right.
and so you weren't going to get anything except what was really available to you. Um, I'm curious what you think. I mean, because you're an open-minded guy when it comes to these things. You don't really freak out too much about the rule changes and that sort of thing. You just like to watch the ball games. Um, when you go to games, do you still think there's as much enthusiasm, or do you think that it was crazier when you were coming up?
Well, baseball is local. I mean,
Mm.
unlike then when you knew everything about both leagues, the interest is local, and you go to a big game at the Minute Maid.
Mm.
It's just it's exciting. I mean, people get into the game there, and I would say that a big game at Minute Maid will generate as much excitement as a big game in Philadelphia, say at the height of the baseball frenzies as a national pastime. I think there's a lot, and you've been there. You've been there for big games,
Hmm.
too.
Sure.
Yeah,
It's intense. There's no doubt
yeah,
about it. And
yeah.
big moments always lend themselves to that. Well, you were a history professor for what, 50 years? Is that right? Am I right
Yeah,
on
yeah.
that?
52,
Yeah.
right.
And in American history, of all things. So you're acutely aware of just how uh, culturally significant those can be. I gotta figure that back then the cultural significance of those things just was much, much higher as compared to today, just because there's so many things spread out all over the place. Um, I mean, you were there when Jackie Robinson came into the league,
Yeah.
obviously. Um, what was all of that like at that time for America as a country? Never mind for baseball, but what was that like? Those sort of moments. Did they galvanize the country as much as it seems like it when you read about them?
Yes. One of the interesting things about American culture compared to today and then is how much more unified the culture was. I mean, there were 3 television channels. Everybody listened to the same radio programs. I mean, on a Sunday night, you listen to Jack Benny, you listen to Fred Allen, you listen to Fibber McGee and Molly. Everybody listened to Amos and Andy. Everybody saw the same movies. Hollywood churned out these movies. You would go in, and everyone they were selling 100 million tickets to the movies in those days, and everybody was seeing the same movie. You were listening to the same music. I mean, I grew up listening to the hit parade on TV, and everybody watched that, and they would play the most popular songs. And baseball was one of those things that's unifying. I still remember in 1948 when Babe Ruth died. I mean, the whole nation was fixated on that in a way that would not. It's impossible to imagine anything like that today. What we've seen since then is a fracturing of American culture. You can see it in music. There's
Mm-hmm.
the variety of musical forms now is tremendous. The cable options you have, the culture is fragmented, and it's also being sliced and diced. But back then, there was much more of a unified culture, and in sports, baseball was central to that. Now, the other point I'd make, I think football has replaced baseball in that regard. And when you see the Super Bowl, that is an event that galvanizes the whole country. That's the one sporting
Yeah.
event you can does that.
Well, I guess part of that too is there's just fewer games. And Super Bowl is a single game. It's not a 7-game series. There are
Right,
only, 15 or 16 games or whatever it is now that they've changed it, plus the playoffs. And for that, there's sort of a gathering moment for watching the games. It's every Sunday, right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
there is that sort of thing where everybody knows it's Sunday afternoon, it's football, whereas baseball could happen anytime, including noon on a Wednesday.
Yeah.
We're seeing
What's the
seeing
score
today.
anyway?
It's 2-0 currently. By the way, I just saw an update. Kyle Tucker hit a home run, and Bregman hit a sacrifice fly.
Wonderful.
So Javier is pitching well. One other thing for you about the history behind it. These moments, whenever we seeing history through the lens of a filmmaker or a documentarian or reading a book, it's obviously different than being there. But so there were such milestone moments that reverberated throughout the country that baseball had a part of, and I think Jackie Robinson is being one of those big ones, and just the general integration of baseball. Was it as seminal? Was it as big a moment at the time that it happened? Like, was there a conscious understanding of everyone culturally that this was going on, or was it something that was kind of happening behind the scenes and that took on more cultural significance later?
Are you talking about Jackie Robinson?
Yeah.
I would say that it happened, but I don't remember much conversation about it among my friends or the family. I mean, it was an event, but what I do remember is when you go out and see a Phillies game, for the first time, there would be tons of black fans, and they were all rooting for the Dodgers, and they did that for years. I wouldn't be surprised if they still do that. And it was perfectly understandable. So
That's great.
that to me was what made Jackie Robinson interesting. It was how he brought black fans to the game and how passionate they were for the Dodgers.
I think it reminds me of recently I've been watching, the Disney just came out with The Little Mermaid, and the new version of The Little Mermaid, that character is going to be black. And I've been seeing reaction videos from little black girls who are seeing the commercial for the first time and really freaking out, because they recognize themselves in this character.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's what happened to people at the time. They saw themselves for the first time in a sport that didn't allow them in prior to that. And so it must have been super exciting. I'm sure it would have been the same for us.
Yeah, well, what your remark kind of indicates is so many things about race relations in America have changed, and so many things are still the same.
Yeah, that's absolutely the truth. No doubt about that. Okay, we're winding down to the end of the season. So I got to know, do you think the Astros are, for two things, actually? We have some incredible big baseball things happening. I mean, Aaron Judge is about to get to 60 home runs. I think he's at 57 now after last night.
Wow.
You've got Albert Pujols, who knew that this guy was going to, be who he was going to be. But you've got the Astros closing in on potentially reaching their biggest win total ever, which I guess was 107 wins.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, how far is Aaron Judge going to get? How far past 60 is he going to make it? He only has about 20 games left, I think, something about that. And are the Astros going to break their? I'm asking you for your predictions here. If the Astros are going to break their record for wins, and how far is Aaron Judge going to get? What would you put the over/under on Aaron Judge at?
I'd put him at 62. I think the Astros could break their record, but I don't think they will, because they're going to be so far ahead. They don't care. They're going to be resting players. They're going to be ready for the playoffs. And so whereas fans like me, Joe Fan, would like to see them break the record, Dusty Baker doesn't care. He's thinking about the division series. Right.
Well, you keep saying this, Joe Fan, but come on. Like, if the average Joe Fan has not watched baseball for 50 or 60 years and remembers, you say that, but you're well versed in your own world when it comes to statistical information. You memorized averages, for Christ's sake.
Well, you know, um, when I listen to Blummer or Bagwell do the commentary, the color, I realize how little I know about the game. I mean, I'm learning something from these guys every time they talk. And yeah, I'm tuned in, and I want to hear what they say, but they have a lot to teach me, even though I've been following this game for 70 years.
It is pretty amazing
Yeah.
to listen to those guys. The amount of knowledge that they, number one, retain, but then obviously they study, and they know what they're doing. They prep themselves, and they've got tremendous talent on top of all that. And it's a fascinating perspective. Well, Al, thank you so much. I appreciate the time. I love talking baseball with you. I would talk baseball with you for hours if I could. And then, of course, at some point off of this podcast, we will soon be talking about basketball as well. Let's not forget that, because the Rockets are coming.
Thanks for having me off. I enjoyed it.
All right. Thanks so much, Al. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks very much, everybody, for joining the podcast today. My special thanks to Alan Matusow, my father-in-law and longtime Astros fan. Love talking to him about baseball, and just an absolutely fascinating guy. Thank you all for joining me. As I mentioned, my partner in crime, Blummer, will be back. We're going to do a short podcast this weekend. Not sure what we're going to call him yet. Maybe a blast cast, or maybe we'll call him a half episode. But we're going to get together this weekend and churn one out, talk about what's been going on. Right now, as I'm looking, it's 1 o'clock, so the Astros are still in the midst of their game in Detroit. No idea what's going on there. You can find us on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, Joe Bob's Podcasting Depot, I think is one. You can also find us on Twitter. Mine is at Jeff Balke, JEFFBALKE. Blummer is at Blummer27. And then, of course, you can find our official one at BLEAV in Astros, all on Twitter. Also, be sure to send us some questions. We'd love to answer your questions. We'd love to find out what you guys are curious about. Just add us and hit us up with those. I'll mention it on Twitter as well. Hit us up with those questions so we can get back some answers to you. Some interesting, maybe some not so interesting. Ask us weird ones. Ask me what I ate at the ballpark the other night. Hint, hint, it was nachos. I love ballpark nachos. And that's maybe something Blum and I need to talk about is ballpark food, because I love me some ballpark food. By the way, I cannot go in there and come out without eating a pretzel. And I've almost come to the point where I cannot go in there and leave without buying a new hat. It's become a thing. What can I do? My wife's thrilled. Thanks everybody for joining us. Really appreciate it. We will talk to you in a few days, and go Astros.